Welcome to the deep dive. So, when we talk about legal codification, that huge moment when people first thought, hey, let's write down the rules, well, most people immediately jump to the 6th century.
Right, to Justinian,
Yeah,
the Byzantine emperor.
exactly. His Corpus Juris Civilis. It's always held up as Rome's, final word on law, the
Yeah.
big summary after 1,000 years.
It is. But
But if we just skip straight to that end point, we miss where it all started. The really revolutionary thinking, the groundwork.
precisely, and that's what we're doing today. We're actually setting aside Justinian for this deep dive.
Okay.
Yeah, we're focusing instead on the founding moments, the real beginnings of Western legal thought in the classical world. Our sources today, they take us right back to the powerhouses. Classical Athens,
So direct democracy.
yeah, radical democracy, and then the Roman Republic, just as it's shifting into the early empire.
Two very different beasts.
Totally different. And our mission, really, is to explore how these two societies even thought about law, about justice, governance, the role of the individual citizen.
And what are we expecting to find?
Well, you'll see this fundamental contrast emerge. Athens sort of rooting its law in popular will, in rhetoric, even civic myth,
Okay.
versus Rome, which is all about building this system based on specialized legal professionals, codes, hierarchy, and eventually imperial authority.
That contrast sounds key. So we'll see Athens championing law as universal, even putting it on stage.
Right, tragedy.
And then Rome with its legal machine defining justice based on who you were, your status, and things like that incredible power fathers had.
The paterfamilias, yeah, it's a stark difference.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's start with Athens and this idea of the people's courts. So classical Athens, they were masters, weren't they, at weaving their political beliefs right into how they talked about law.
Oh, absolutely.
You see it so clearly in the big speeches, like Demosthenes. He wasn't just arguing a case. He was arguing for Athens itself.
Exactly. He praised the law, famously, as something universal, equal, and the same for all,
Right.
and argued that sticking to this rule of law is what actually preserves every city. It holds it together.
And this wasn't just feel-good rhetoric, was it? Our sources show it was highly political.
Extremely political. This high praise for democratic law was used specifically to bash the alternative oligarchy.
Okay.
Yeah, Demosthenes, Aeschines too.
Mm-hmm.
They both laid it out. In an oligarchy, the leaders think they're above the law. They think they can just change the rules after the fact, to cover their actions or suit their needs.
Retroactively.
Right. Whereas democracy, they argued, its stability, its freedom, really, came from sticking to established laws, the nomoi. That couldn't be changed backwards.
So the idea was you're only free if you know the rules in advance, and they apply to everyone.
That's the core democratic ideal they were pushing. Law wasn't just a tool of the government. It was your shield, the citizens' protection against arbitrary power from the elites.
Okay, so if the law itself is the bedrock, then how justice is done has to reflect that democratic idea.
It has to.
Which brings us to that really radical shakeup around 462 BCE, the one led by Ephialtes.
Yes, that was huge. And it happened just about 4 years before Aeschylus put on his Oresteia trilogy, which is significant.
We'll get to that connection. But first, Ephialtes' reform. What was the situation before him?
Before Ephialtes, you had the Council of the Areopagus. This is the big traditional authority.
The old guard.
Pretty much. It was made up only of ex-archons, the top magistrates. So basically the richest, highest classes. The lowest class, the theates, they were completely shut out.
And what power did this council have?
Immense power, but kind of vague power, too. They checked if magistrates were fit for office, they were seen as the guardians of the laws, and they had this sort of general oversight over the city's morals.
Sounds like a recipe for aristocratic control, keeping things the way they always were.
Exactly. It was a bastion of that traditional power.
So what did Ephialtes manage to do to it?
He basically dismantled almost all its political clout, systematically. He got measures passed that stripped the Areopagus of its power to veto officials, oversee laws, or police morality.
Wow. Where did that power go?
Straight to the democratic bodies, to the bull, which was the council of 500 citizens, and crucially to the popular courts, the dikasteria.
The one staffed by ordinary citizens.
Thousands of them, chosen by lot. So he essentially handed over these core political functions directly to the people.
That's a massive shift from this elite, almost hereditary council to, well, random citizen.
A direct transfer of power.
Yeah.
But they couldn't or didn't strip everything.
Right. That's the crucial bit. The Areopagus wasn't abolished. It was left with a much smaller but very symbolic role.
What was left?
Its main job became judging trials for homicide, serious wounding, arson, and a few very specific religious crimes, like, believe it or not, damaging sacred olive stumps.
Sacred olive stumps. Okay.
But the point is, this reform totally democratized how justice worked for most things. The average citizen judge, the dicast, became the ultimate decider.
And it wasn't a peaceful transition, was it?
No, not at all. Ephialtes was assassinated not long after. That tells you how high the stakes were, how fiercely contested this was.
So a moment of real political danger. And that brings us back to Aeschylus and the Oresteia.
Yes, particularly the last play, the Eumenides. It feels like art directly responding to politics here.
It absolutely is. The Eumenides is amazing because it's the only surviving Greek tragedy we have that's actually set in Athens at the Areopagus itself.
And it's basically the founding myth of the court.
Exactly. It's the city's charter myth for its justice system. Yeah. The plot, stages the trial of Orestes. He killed his mother, Clytemnestra.
Who killed his father.
Right. A cycle of vengeance. And the Furies, these ancient spirits of retribution, are hunting him down. The play shows this terrifying shift from that old blood feud cycle to a formal, public, civic trial.
And Athena steps in.
Athena, the city's goddess, steps in. She establishes the Areopagus court specifically to try Orestes. She presides, but crucially, the verdict comes down to a jury of Athenian citizens.
So by staging this myth right after Ephialtes' reforms,
Aeschylus is directly wading into that controversy. Yeah. The message seems pretty clear. Look, limiting the Areopagus to murder trials isn't destroying tradition. It's actually restoring the court to its original God-given purpose.
Legitimizing the change.
Precisely. Legitimizing the court's new, narrower role for blood crimes, and by implication, legitimizing the transfer of all its other powers to the people's courts.
So the theater becomes this space for hashing out and justifying major political shifts. Okay, let's move from the mythic stage down to the messy reality of the courtroom floor. Because our modern ideas of judges and lawyers just don't apply here, do they?
Not at all. It's a completely different setup. No professional judges interpreting complex statutes, no trained lawyers arguing precedent.
So who is running the show?
Well, the judges were those ordinary citizens, the dicasts, chosen by lot. And cases only happened if a private citizen decided to bring a lawsuit. The whole thing was essentially a huge public performance.
A performance aimed at what then, if not purely legal interpretation?
It was aimed at convincing those citizen judges about your character, your reputation, your loyalty to Athens.
Really? Less about the facts of the case.
Well, the facts mattered, but the focus was often less on the letter of the law and more on assessing, who seemed more believable, who was the better citizen, what was the probability that this person would do such a thing.
So you had to persuade the jury that your interests lined up with the interests of the demos, the people as a whole.
Exactly. You had to show that the wrong done to you was also, in a way, a wrong done to the community. You talk about your public service, your family's history, the taxes you'd paid.
Your liturgies, we'll get to those.
Yes. It was all about proving you were the more valuable, more trustworthy member of the democratic community. The court wasn't just deciding guilt or innocence on a technicality. It was judging your overall worthiness as a citizen.
Which makes Athenian citizenship feel very performative. You constantly had to prove yourself.
Deeply performative.
Yeah.
Your standing wasn't fixed. It had to be actively demonstrated, especially when challenged in court.
Okay, so if Athens grounded its law in this performance of popular will and civic character, Rome seems to go in a completely different direction. Obsessed with certainty, structure, professionalism.
Yes, often seeming to push popular involvement to the side, at least in the development of legal theory.
And this quest for legal order, it started very early on and very exclusively.
It did. We need to think about the earliest Roman law, which was genuinely unwritten, not just uncodified, but held entirely as knowledge by a tiny group.
Who held it?
In the early Republic, it was the Pontiffs, the priestly college. Before writing was widespread, the actual customs, the rules, the procedures, it was all entrusted solely to the collective memory of this elite group.
So they were the gatekeepers of justice.
Absolutely. They knew the law, and crucially, they controlled the calendar, the Fastidicon, knowing which days were even permissible for legal action.
Wow.
This concentration of knowledge gave the aristocracy just immense control over whether ordinary people could even access the legal system. Legal knowledge was power, and it was locked away.
But then things get written down, like the 12 tables. Did that break the elite control?
Not entirely. It shifted. That control didn't vanish. It just sort of formalized itself through professional expertise.
Which brings us right to the core of classical Roman legal practice. The jurists.
The legal expert.
Yes, the key practice was the responsa prudentium. These were authoritative answers, opinions, given by respected jurists, the prudence on specific legal questions put to them.
Who asked them? Magistrates, private citizens, both. A magistrate handling a tricky case, or just an individual needing advice. And during the Republic, the weight of that advice, its authority, really just depended on the jurist's personal reputation.
Their social standing, their perceived wisdom.
Exactly. It was informal authority based on prestige.
But then Rome transitions from republic to empire, and this changes fundamentally. Augustus steps in.
Right. Augustus wanted to bring this growing body of legal opinion under more central control, make it more predictable, more aligned with imperial authority.
How did he do that?
He created something called the effigius respondendi ex auctoritate principis.
The right to respond with the emperor's authority.
Precisely. This was a game changer.
Yeah.
Instead of every respected jurist's opinion carrying weight based on their personal reputation, now only a select group, handpicked and approved by the emperor, could issue responsites that carried official imperial backing.
So it's not just an endorsement. It's like, this is now the officially sanctioned interpretation.
That's exactly it. And it had to be written down and sealed. It formalized the whole process, creating this official class of state-approved legal experts.
What happened if these official experts disagreed?
Good question. Later emperors, like Hadrian, established rules. Basically, if the approved jurists were divided, the majority opinion won out and became the binding interpretation.
So you see this steady centralization of legal interpretation. It's becoming professionalized, controlled.
And its legitimacy flows directly from the emperor. It's a move away from custom and reputation towards state-sanctioned expertise.
This must have fundamentally shifted how Romans thought about the source of law itself.
It absolutely did. The legal theory that developed in the empire increasingly saw the civil law primarily as, well, pronouncements coming from the emperor or his authorized delegates.
And there's a clear political logic behind this.
Oh, yes. The theory explicitly links social order to political order, and political order is defined and maintained by the monarch, the emperor, which leads to this really critical, almost paradoxical idea. The emperor, as the ultimate source of the law, must logically stand above the law he creates.
He's not bound by his own rules. Salutis legibus.
Exactly, salutis legibus. Now, this raises huge questions, right? If the ruler isn't bound by the rules, how is it still the rule of law?
Yeah.
The justification was basically necessity. The emperor's supreme authority, above the day-to-day laws, was needed to guarantee ultimate order and stability. He was the source of all legitimate commands, so he couldn't be constrained by them.
That hierarchical structure, the lawgiver being above the law, must have had some pretty brutal consequences when it came to actually punishing crime, especially given Rome's obsession with status.
Absolutely brutal. Roman criminal justice was starkly divided by status. The jurists made a very clear legal distinction between the honestiores,
The higher status people, nobles, the wealthy.
right, and the humiliores.
Lower status peasants, laborers, most freedmen.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a social observation, it was baked into the law. It dictated the kind of punishment you could receive.
What was the difference in practice? How severe are we talking?
For the honestiores, punishments were generally things like fines, having property confiscated, or being exiled. Their actual bodies were usually protected from sort of degrading physical punishment.
Okay. And for the humiliores?
That's where the concept of sevitia, or systematic severity, comes in. Jurists, like Ulpian, writing in the 2nd century, openly advocated for harsh, punitive rules for the lower classes.
Why? As a deterrent.
Explicitly, they focused on the ponemitas of the fear of punishment. The idea was to use harsh physical penalties to keep the lower orders in line.
So what kind of punishments did they face?
The really grim stuff. Public flogging, being sent to forced labor in the mines, crucifixion, punishments that were almost unthinkable for an honestier.
So the law literally created 2 tiers of physical safety based purely on your social rank.
Essentially, yes. One class whose citizenship included protection from state-inflicted cruelty, and another whose subordination was constantly reinforced by the very real threat of extreme physical violence.
Okay, shifting from criminal law into the family. we hit probably the most uniquely Roman legal concept, patria potestas.
Ah, yes, paternal power. It's genuinely striking.
How extreme was it?
Extremely. It gave the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, this almost property-like authority over the descendants, children, grandchildren, regardless of their age and over their property.
For their whole lives.
Potentially, yes, until the paterfamilias died or chose to emancipate them. Our sources mention that even during Hadrian's time, other Mediterranean cultures found this Roman power quite singular, quite strange.
So the father technically owned everything his adult children earned.
In theory, yes. And the power, historically at least, was incredibly vast, technically, including the right of life and death over children, or the right to sell them.
Did they actually exercise those extreme rights in later periods?
Very, very rarely, if ever, in the Republican Empire. Those became more theoretical limits. But the economic control remained very real.
So here's the puzzle. How did the Romans reconcile this? You could have a, say, 30-year-old senator, a powerful man in public life, but technically still under his father's potestas, maybe financially dependent. Was he still considered a full citizen?
Yes. And this is where the Roman genius for legal compartmentalization really shows.
Okay.
The jurists drew a very sharp line between the private sphere of the family, the jus rivatum, and the public sphere of citizenship rights, the jus publicum.
So your dad controlling your inheritance didn't affect your right to vote?
Exactly. A son, no matter his age or how much he was under his father's thumb financially, kept all his public rights. He could vote, hold office, serve in the army, everything a citizen does in public. The patria potestas was strictly confined to family structure and assets. It didn't bleed into your public legal identity.
That's a really sophisticated distinction they maintained. Okay, so we've seen in both Athens and Rome that law wasn't just about abstract rules. It was deeply involved in managing social conflicts, status, reputation.
Absolutely. It often reflected and reinforced those social realities rather than trying to erase them.
In Athens, this focus on reputation and avoiding shame gets codified in the legal idea of hubris.
Right. And hubris in the legal sense is much more specific than just, excessive pride.
What did it mean legally?
Legally, hubris was about intentional conduct aimed specifically at humiliating someone else, insulting them publicly. The key was doing it for the pleasure of asserting your own superiority and actively disgracing the victim.
So the harm wasn't necessarily physical, it was about the intent to dishonor.
Exactly. The core of the crime was the attack on the victim's honor, their standing in the community.
And the sources give examples like adultery. How did that fit the definition of hubris?
Well, adultery was seen as a prime example. The act itself, committed by the adulterer against the husband, was considered a profound act of hubris.
Even if the wife consented?
Yes, because it fundamentally damaged the husband's honor and public reputation. It made him look weak or foolish.
And the law recognized this damage to honor needed a response.
It did. The law often permitted the wronged husband to seek revenge, sometimes in ways that directly mirrored the humiliation.
This is where it gets pretty grim, right?
Yeah. Our sources mention the historical allowance for the husband to inflict quite severe mistreatment on the adulterer if caught in the act, including the infamous practice of raffinezine.
Using a radish. Anally.
Yes. A specific symbolic act of sexual humiliation designed to inflict maximum disgrace and reassert the husband's damaged honor.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined honor, status, and even legally sanctioned violence were.
Absolutely. Now, shifting back to Rome, we see status playing a similar defining role, especially for a group with very precarious legal standing. Freed slaves, the liberty.
Right. Manumission granted freedom, but it wasn't a clean break, was it?
Not usually. Freedom could be granted in specific ways through a will, testamentum, a formal legal action, vindicta, or being listed in the census. But even once freed, the person almost always entered a lifelong client relationship with their former master.
The master becomes a patron.
Exactly. And the patron retained significant social influence and even some legal claims over the freedman or freedwoman.
So it's like freedom, but with strings attached. Continued subordination.
In many ways, yes. And the law reflected this complicated status. How much protection did a freedman actually have against mistreatment from their patron?
Good question. Could they sue for insults like any other citizen?
They could bring an action for insult, the actio injuriarum, but the courts were very reluctant to grant it against the patron.
Why?
It was only really considered if the offense was judged to be aggravated. Seriously aggravated.
What counted as aggravated?
Things that essentially treated the freedman as if they were still a slave. Like, if the patron chained them, denied them basic legal rights, or inflicted severe physical injury, specifically mentioning whipping with a lash or rods, that crossed a line, suggesting re-enslavement.
But lesser insults were tolerated.
Yes. The sources are clear that moderate verbal abuse, or even a degree of physical chastisement from the patron, was often legally overlooked.
Why allow that?
It seems it was to deliberately uphold the social hierarchy, to acknowledge the enduring bond and the patron's sort of limited but legally recognized right to discipline their client, even though they were technically free. The patron-client relationship trumped general equality here.
Status again. And it wasn't just used to keep people down. The wealthy actively used their status and actions to boost their standing, right? Back in Athens, with financial duties.
Oh, definitely. Wealthy Athenians had obligations like performing liturgies.
These were expensive public services.
Very expensive, like funding a worship, a trireme for a year, or paying for a public chorus in a religious festival. And they also paid special war taxes, the eisphori.
Were these just burdens, or is there more to it?
While they were required duties, there were also massive opportunities for public display. Successfully funding a liturgy showed everyone your wealth, yes, but more importantly, your commitment to the city, your patriotism.
And they used this in court.
All the time. If a rich Athenian was on trial for something completely unrelated, say, assault, they would absolutely bring up their record of performing liturgies and paying taxes.
As character evidence.
Powerful character evidence. The argument was basically, look how much I give back to the city. Would a man like me, who spends his fortune supporting Athens, really do this bad thing? It demonstrated loyalty, trustworthiness, and reinforced their elite status.
Again, that performative aspect of citizenship, you had to constantly show your value.
Constantly. Your civic virtue wasn't assumed. It had to be demonstrated through these public acts.
Okay, so all this talk of law being tangled up with status, honor, performance, myth, it brings us to a fundamental philosophical problem, doesn't it? Even the greatest thinkers seem to struggle to pin down what justice actually is.
Absolutely. You see this really clearly in the Socratic dialogues recorded by Xenophon. Socrates is wrestling with defining justice.
And what did he come up with?
Well, there's this tension. On a high philosophical level, Socrates often equates justice, and really all virtue, with wisdom or prudence. The idea being that if you're truly wise, you'll inherently know what's just and naturally do it.
That sounds very idealistic. The wise person can't help but be just.
Exactly. But then, when pushed on the practicalities of living in a city-state,
What did he say then?
he seems to conclude, in a more down-to-earth way, that justice basically means doing what the laws command. Obedience to the nomos.
Just follow the rules.
It seems like a pragmatic concession. Even if the laws aren't perfect, maybe not perfectly aligned with philosophical wisdom, you still have to obey them for the state to function at all.
So there's this constant gap, this tension between some ideal moral justice and the practical need for civic order through established laws.
Precisely. That tension between striving for true justice through wisdom and the necessity of obeying potentially flawed laws, that feels like the core philosophical struggle running underneath everything we've discussed in both Athens and Rome. #outro.
So putting it all together, Athens with its people's courts and rhetoric, Rome with its jurists and imperial codes, we've really dug into two foundational systems grappling with huge questions like, where does law even come from? Is it the gods, the people, an expert elite, the emperor?
Yeah, and how does any legal system, especially one claiming to be just, actually deal with the undeniable realities of social status, personal honor, family power, all that messy human stuff?
We often talk about codes like Justinian's as these neat endpoints, don't we? The final answer.
We do. But looking back at these earlier sources, like we've done today, you see the intense debates, the political fights, the philosophical struggles that had to happen first.
They weren't just writing rules on a blank slate.
Not at all. They were building their ideas about morality, justice, and society, right alongside building the legal structures themselves, constantly negotiating between old traditions, aristocratic privilege, and these new forces of democracy or empire.
Okay, so here's a final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on. In both classical Athens and early Rome, it seems like your actual rights, maybe even your physical safety, often depended less on the written law or even just being a citizen, and more on your social rank, who you knew, and frankly, how good you were at telling your story, performing your status in public.
A convincing performance could matter more than the legal code.
So the provocative question is, to what extent does that shadow still linger today? In our modern legal systems, systems that inherited so much from Greece and Rome, how much does access to justice, the quality of your legal performance, still feel tied to wealth, status, connections, rather than just the pure, impartial letter of the law?
That's a heavy question, something that probably resonates even now.
It certainly gives you pause. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you for joining us as we explored these fascinating legal origins